I never expected it either. But you know what? Here we are. Talking about something other than premium. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Maybe Things Can Get Better. So over this past weekend, I finally got to play some overDress. I got to sit down with Mr. Time Leap himself, aka Vanguard Insider, and we streamed the whole thing on Twitch. So if you want to, go check out that VOD. Otherwise, I'll probably upload it here within a week or so. And it was a lot of fun. So much so that immediately after the stream and for the next couple days afterward, it was all I could think about, right? I just couldn't stop thinking about how I could change my decks around, how I could play differently, how I could build differently. So much is so new in overdress, and it's literally all I can think about and all I want to talk about. So let's just get into that. And just a quick disclaimer, if you've already played some stuff with overdress, pretty much anything I'm going to say is not going to be a surprise to you. In fact, even if you haven't, it probably won't be that big of a surprise to you, but I'm so excited about this. It's just all I want to talk about. So we're going to talk about it today. Really, there's like 4 or 5 main things I really want to talk about, and we'll just get right into them. The first and main thing has got to be the ride deck, and I knew it would affect the way I played the game and how I built decks, which is why I made my video about wanting it in other formats, but it affected it even more than I expected. It is such a great mechanic and such a great implementation of it that, as I'm sure you probably feel as well, I don't know why Bushiroad didn't integrate something like this years ago. And of course, the main thing it affects is deck building, because no longer are you required to run your perfect ratio to consistently ride up. It has been so ingrained in me since the start of Vanguard that you run 14 grade 1s, 11 grade 2s, and 8 grade 3s. And now I will say that in V, that definitely changed slightly with perfect guards getting moved to the grade 0 slots into your triggers. And so then you probably would run something around like 12 grade 1s, 11 grade 2s, and 10 grade 3s. Then it also kind of changed to where you only ran 4 grade 3s because riding into literally any other grade 3 was that detrimental to your game plan, at least for certain decks. But that's all gone now, right? You don't have to worry about it. You can just sit there and get the exact same ride every single turn. What changes how you play the game isn't your Vanguard, it's your rear guards. Rear guards are so much more important now in what you fill your deck with that it's honestly one of the best changes I think they could have done. As a premium focused player mostly, one of my biggest annoyances with other formats is that you don't have that toolbox of the G zone. I love having that like kind of grab bag of tools that I can go into and kind of change what my Vanguard is for specific situations. And to a certain extent, that really still kind of annoys me in V premium, but for some reason it doesn't bother me as much in overdress. And I think the reason being is because these grade 3s that they have, at least the ones I've played with so far, are so well designed that they are very simple, they're very straightforward, but I think that's to their benefit. So even though you're going to be using the same Vanguard every single game, how you play will still be kind of varied based on your rear guards and whether or not you've persona ridden and things like that. So there's definitely some variance in gameplay that I think is what kind of helps it not be so samey for me. And like I said, with that, deck building is completely blown open now. You don't have to worry about your ideal ratios anymore. If you only want to run 1 grade 2 at a playset, you can do that. If you want to fill your deck with grade 3s, you can do that. If you want to run 8 to 12 orders, you can do that and it will not affect your gameplay in the slightest. It might affect the way you guard, and guarding has changed a lot too, and we'll get into that, but it's so strange because my mentality around deck building has to completely change. Because we're no longer restricted to running certain amounts of grades to consistently ride up, the limits on what you can do are really kind of taken off within reason though, because you still have to run your 16 triggers. You still have to run your grade 0, 1, 2, and 3 for your ride deck. And ideally you're still going to be running your 4 perfect guards. So that right there kind of decides half your deck for you, which is fine, I think, because there's still decisions you need to make within your trigger lineup. What kinds of triggers do you run? What amounts of those triggers do you run? Do you go for all crits? Do you go for mostly fronts? What trigger is going to be the one that you hit? Do you hit your draw triggers so that you run only 3 with your 1 overtrigger, or do you run 1 less critical or front or whatever? There's still decision making even within what you're required to run, and I really like that. Now I want to talk about guarding, because like I said, guarding changes a lot. And while the shift to 5k shield on your grade 1s with the trigger power staying the same definitely felt weird and off, I still am kind of mixed on how I feel about it. I think I can generally say it's a positive, because no longer you're going to be holding onto cards just to guard with, other than triggers, of course, because that 5k shield is almost rarely relevant. Maybe if you hit a defensive trigger, it will come up more often. Triggers are very, very important and are going to almost definitely be dedicated to just shielding. One thing I really like that they did too is that even though they kept the trigger power at 10k, I think they've done a decent job of building around that. So back in the original and G eras of the game was built around 5k triggers. 16k was your magic number, so that even if your opponent hit 1 defensive trigger, you were still going to hit over it. And you only really ran into trouble if they hit 2. It really kind of feels like we're getting back to that. 23k is our new magic number, and cards hit that very easily. It is definitely seemed like even though we have 10k triggers, they have accounted for that and are designing their cards accordingly. It really didn't feel like that in V. Power levels were just kind of all over the place. And then the inherent inconsistencies between Force and Excel and Protect clans, that's no longer a thing. We're kind of back to the way I think the game should be. And while I understand they had the differences between Force and Protect and Excel for a flavor reason, I suppose, it really didn't translate well into gameplay. It really seems they've kind of like gone back to the way things used to be and have just established a new baseline. And that kind of seems to be the way it is with costs as well, which we'll also get into in a bit. But with these power levels where they're at, with shield values where they're at, where trigger power where it's at, it really makes you kind of have to pick and choose what you guard and what you don't. And that's another aspect of the game where the mentality really needs to change. And it's gonna be a bit of a learning period, because especially if you've been a long time player, you've had like 10 years or so of certain mentality just being drilled into your head, and it's all different now. PGs are also very different. Having those last 2 cards in your hand be a PG to be able to perfect guard and perfect guard completely changes a guarding turn and can really make things that would have before felt like unwinnable situations, you can actually kind of play around. And I love that. It feels really, really good. The free PG aspect doesn't come up often, but if you plan for it, it can completely save you through a turn. The next thing I wanted to kind of touch on is damage denial and how it's not necessarily a thing. It definitely can be, but the way I kind of see it is more as damage choking, if that makes sense. Because the design team has definitely established a curve for the game, for where they want their costs to be and how they want things to be costed. We are now back into the days of Counterblast 2 for skills. And the reason why I say damage denial isn't as much of a thing and it's more what I call damage choking is because you still want to give your opponent damage. You have to give your opponent 6 damage to win the game, obviously, right? Because everything kind of has a cost. You can not necessarily damage deny your opponent to the point where they have like no damage, and if you give them 1 damage, they'll completely turn the game around and kill you with that 1 damage. You can kind of control the amount of damage they get and make them have to pick and choose which skills they want to use for a given turn. I think a perfect example is something like the Virina deck. You can stall your opponent with only 1 or 2 damage to where they have to decide, okay, do I want to use Nirvana's skill this turn to give plus 10k to my front row? Or do I want to use that counterblast to go into a Virina Arcs to draw 2 cards? Or do I want to make sure I leave a counterblast open so that if I have Valiente, I can pressure that on hit to restand it? It makes for a lot of difficult decisions that you can impose on your opponent by not giving them no damage, but by controlling the amount of damage they get so that they have to play a more restrictive turn. And I really, really like that. It actually came up in some of the games where even though Eric could have swung at me, it would have given me 1 more damage and given me a lot more plays. And so by restricting the amount of damage I got, it really restricted me and made me have to pick and choose what was more important for that turn. And I really like that. And I would like to see something like that continue, where you're not just no swinging back and forth every single turn, because if you give your opponent that 1 damage, they'll just turn around and kill you. More that you control your opponent's turns, so that way it's easier for you on your turn. And then that way nobody's just locked out of playing the game. Lastly, and probably not surprisingly, I do want to talk about the Overtrigger. More than grade 1 shield changing, more than 10k trigger staying the same, the Overtrigger is most definitely the most contentious part of this new series. And I think I have to agree with a lot of the sentiment around it. At least in a competitive sense, if you win your game with it, it feels bad. If you won your game because you checked it as a 5th heal and it stopped your opponent's entire turn from killing you that turn, it doesn't necessarily feel great because you won only because of the Overtrigger. But what I can say is that it's just another aspect of this new series where the mentality has to change. 2 to pass is not exactly a thing anymore, and here's a clip to prove it.
So this is 13?
13, yeah, we'll do it this way. We'll go 2 to pass.
Or Overtrigger to pass.
Or Overtrigger to pass, that's right. That would be a very hype way to go out.
First check. Oh my God! Let's go!
Okay.
So this is going to be 100 million power to the Vanguard.
Yep.
And then second check, another draw trigger, so power to eat it, and I draw a card.
Oh, this is why we PG. So even though in that scenario, my instinct was it's only 13. I'll throw down a 15k shield, be 28, 2 to pass, and I'll be good. The Overtrigger being involved completely changes that situation to the point where I think the mentality needs to become, if you have the PG, just do it. Just throw it down and try and guard as best you can. Because like you saw in that clip, I had 2 PGs in hand. I could have definitely survived that turn and come back and done my own turn back, and it would have been a lot different. But because I just went 2 to pass, lost the game because of it. In that scenario specifically, and every scenario is going to be different, but in that scenario specifically, even though the Overtrigger is what won the game there, it didn't have to be. I was still in control and was just dumb and didn't PG when I had the chance. I'm still mixed on the Overtrigger, but I do feel like there's probably more control you have than you might think. Sure, there will be times where you're completely like drained down from your hand and you have no PG and you're just done because of it. And that sucks. That feels really bad. But I can honestly say too that in the games where the Overtrigger was checked, it didn't necessarily win me the game. And it didn't necessarily win my opponent the game either. It definitely made that turn a lot more explosive, but the amount of times it came up where it was drive checked during a final turn weren't that many. A lot of times it happened like in the mid game, if it happened at all. I think that pretty much sums up most of my thoughts, and just let my PSA be, if you have the PG, just PG. Anyways, I think that'll do it for today. Thanks so much for tuning in. And if you have also been playtesting Overdress and like me, you just want to talk about it, let me know your thoughts below. I really love hearing everybody's kind of thoughts and experiences, and this is just one of the most exciting times I've seen in Vanguard in general, and to see the whole community as hyped as they are around it, I don't know, it's really, really cool, and I just would love to hear more experiences and share those experiences. Also, come stop by the Twitch, because I would like to continue to do these kind of playtesting streams more often. We're definitely doing a lot of deck building over there too, especially as we're going to start getting set 2 reveals now. It's been a good time. So yeah, go drop a follow over there and come hang out sometime. Also, like, comment, subscribe, all the fun YouTube-y things. Really does help me out a lot. I really appreciate you for it. But yeah, I think that'll do it for now. Until next time.